Welcome, and thank you all for standing by. At this time, I would like to inform all participants that your lines have been placed on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. Today's call is also being recorded. If anyone does have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. And I would now like to turn the call over to Ms. Wendy Peebles. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, operator. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wendy Peebles, Lead Outreach Coordinator, Census Bureau Economic Management Division. Today's webinar topic is an introduction to the Applied Programming Interface, or API. With me today is Jeremy Sanchez, Survey Statistician, International Trade Macro Analysis Branch, Economic Indicators Division. And first, I'd like to start by thanking everyone for joining today's webinar. We have an informative webinar plan, and I would like to go over a few items before we start. The webinar is being recorded, as the operator mentioned, and for confidentiality reasons, we ask that during the question and answer period that will occur at the end of today's webinar, that you only provide your first name and do not disclose your company's name or any other sensitive information. For today's webinar, questions will be submitted via the chat feature and should be submitted to all panelists. And we will utilize the operator for questions via the phone as well at the end. The presenter will address as many questions as possible during the webinar, and the presenter's contact information will be provided for further follow-up. About 10 business days following the webinar, the transcript, recording, and presentation will be posted to the Census website. You can look for the link message in the chat box. Lastly, we value your feedback, so please complete the survey. So as you log out of the WebEx link, you will be redirected to an external website, and the survey will appear. So I just wanted to remind you that many of you may be aware that May is World Trade Month. And we want to provide some statistical data on the top U.S. exporting country destinations and the U.S. import top countries of origins for the month of March of this year. This is a monthly report that the branch produces, and the information is located on the Census website. Just look for the trade data page, visualization page, and you should find these wonderful data graphs that are present. So just looking on the export side for the top countries of destination, we see, I'll just take a look at the top three. We have Canada at $27.9 billion, Mexico $23.5 billion, and then China third with about $12.5 billion. And you can see the other countries and the other countries category. As we look at U.S. imports, the top countries of origin, it just kind of looks like the reverse. We have China with $40.2 billion, Mexico $33.4, and Canada $29.8. So just wanted to show you some data on the export and on the import side. So at this time, I'm going to pass it on to Jeremy to begin with the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy Sanchez, and like Wendy said, I work for the International Trade Macro Analysis Branch here, the Economic Indicators Division of the Census Bureau. We're the office that's responsible for disseminating the monthly trade statistics for the United States. But today I'm going to be talking to you about our International Trade API. And since this is an introduction, I will presume no knowledge of what an API is or how it works, and we'll get into that. I will presume some basic knowledge about our International Trade Data Program, mostly because given the scope of this presentation, I don't have time to get into all the details, but even if you are a trade novice, you should be able to follow along, and we have plenty of resources for people curious to know more about our trade data program. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is what is an API, what kind of API do we have, and how might you use it? The second thing we're going to talk about is all the sort of data you can get in our trade API. There's a lot of data, and it's good to know what's in there and what are the benefits of using it. and then we're going to talk about how to construct a call. So we're going to look at deconstructing a call and what are the parts of it and how to make the call to get the data set that you want. Then we're going to go over 2 worked examples where we can go over really the logic and how to get the most out of your data set, exactly how you want it. At the end, we're going to cover some really great resources to take you from this introduction and hopefully propel you to be able to make the calls that you need. Okay, so what is an API? So API stands for Application Program Interface. What it does is allows a computer program to access features or data for another application. Just like if you're a carpenter, you might not want to go into the woods and cut a tree down and strip of the bark and cut into planks. A programmer might not want to make every little piece of their program from the ground up. So that's what APIs come in. An example of this is sometimes when you log into websites, instead of logging in through them, you're allowed to log in through a social media account or a web email client. And by doing that, it helps the users, helps the programmers, and makes things a little easier. So the International Trade API is a data API, and what that does is it allows the users to call our trade data directly into their application, which instead of having to download our entire database and then query from that, you can get direct access to a lot of our detailed trade data through our trade API. And the great thing about our API is that it's not just comes out a bunch of ones and zeros or things that are only readable by computers. It's also readable by humans, as we'll see when we look at the output. So it makes it great for non-programmers to get a lot of data, even if they don't have that ability to read in things from a program. Okay, so let's talk about the data that we do have in our trade API. So like all of our detailed data that we have at the Census, it is not seasonally adjusted census basis. It's also nominal, so it's not adjusted for inflation. And any dollar value you'll see is rounded to the nearest dollar. So as far as the time period, we have monthly import and export data from 2013 through the present, which are most current data is from March of 2021. So in the API, we have data by 6 different classification systems. So our harmonized system, which has our most amount of commodities and most detailed. We also have our NAICS classification system, end use, which we use in our FT900, our main release. SIPC, which is used by the UN, advanced technology products, along with the USDA agricultural classification systems. We also have data by port for our HS data and state for HS and NAICS level data. And we have almost all of the published variables for every data set. So all the data that we publish by each of these classification systems, pretty much all of that is going to be available in the API. So why might you go to the API versus something else? Well, some data are easily available only in the API. One example is our monthly end use by country data. So if you were looking for an end use code in the trade in that, imports or exports by a particular country for a month, a certain month, we don't have any pre-populated tables that we publish for that. And so right now, if you weren't using the API, the only way to get that data is to download the entire data set, which can be gigabytes of data, and then use our concordance files and to get that end-use data. And in the API, you can do it very quickly, as we'll see in one of the examples. There's also method transportation data available for SIPC, which is, again, is not in any of our published tables on the website. And method transportation for our harmonized system district level, so the full 10-digit codes, are available easily in the API, and it's actually not in USA Trade Online. So that might be a reason why you would use that instead of USA Trade Online. Another great thing is it's free to use. So any number of calls that you make, any size, as long as it returns, it's free to use. There's no cost. There's also no signups. So you don't have to create an account and then create a password with all the requirements, and you might have to update it every so often. So there's no signups. which is really great. One minor exception, that if you make more than 500 calls in a single day, then you might be asked, you have to sign up for a key. And the key, you just sign up with your email, and you will have to use that after that 500th call. That's just to help us track some of our heavier users. But if you're not a programmer, you're very unlikely to ever reach that threshold. Okay, so let's talk about the call. I'm mentioning it, but let's see what it looks like. So as you can see from this first part, it kind of looks like a website. And the reason is because it is kind of like a website, just one that you tailor to get the data that you want. So looking at this part in red, it's called the Unique Resource Identifier, or URI, but you can really think of it as an address. So this is just telling the API where the data that you want lives. And so everything that you see from that HTTPS all the way up to that INTL trade is going to be the same for any call that you make to the International Trade API. The only thing that can be different are those next two directories pointed out by those blue arrows. So that first directory, it has one of two things. It's either imports or exports, depending what you want. The second one is a data set within imports or exports that you want. So in this case, you see it says state HS. So that's the state HS data. You might be asking, how do I know what it's called or which one is available? And I'll show you that in our resource page. This has a list of all the data sets and the endpoints for all of them. Okay, the second part is what's called a GET statement. Now this is something, again, that does not change for any call that you make. And it's just that question mark, the word GET, and then a equal sign. And that won't change again, and that just tells the API, this is how I'm retrieving the data. So you just want to make sure that you have that between that first URI, that address, and then what follows next, which is the parameters. And the parameters are really what creates the data that you get back from your call. So your parameters, as you can see in this example, we have three. So we have state, we have one called all_val_mo, which signifies that monthly value, and then we have year. And you see that the year has a little formula with that equal sign 2020. And you'll also notice that some of these parameters are separated by commas, the state and all_val_mo, and some are separate, or two are separated by an ampersand or and symbol. And we'll sort of get into the logic behind that in just a little bit, but all you need to know at this point is that there are two ways to separate parameters, and those ones separated by commas should be on the left side, and the ones separated by the ampersands will all be on the right. Now, let's talk about parameters and tips about choosing the parameters. So you saw in the last one that we just had the year, but you're actually going to want to include the month and year parameters in all of your calls. You can also use the time parameter, which we'll talk about later. They both are necessary to make any call. And the time parameter, you can use it, but it does return data that's lower, so month and year are preferable for larger calls. When we saw with that all_val_mo, that _mo, you're going to see that in other types of parameters. Whenever you see that, it signifies monthly value. You will also see _yr, and that signifies the year-to-date value. So if you're looking at June, if you had all_val_mo, that's going to be the value for June. If you had all_val_year, that's going to be the value up to and including June. If you want annual values, you want to make sure to set your month as December. Talk about how to do that. And then as far as which ones to use with the commas and which ones to use the ampersand, the best way to think about it is you're going to want to list every parameter or any variable that you want in your call with those comma-separated variables. So if you know you want data for a certain country, you're going to want to put country in there. If you want data by a certain state, you're going to want, or states in general, you're going to want to put the state as a parameter. And so everything you want to put that in those comma-separated variables. What those ampersands do is a narrow the focus. And as we saw in that last one, the year had that equals 2020. And so you're going to see anytime you have that ampersand, you're going to say, this is what I want, and we're going to talk a little about that in the examples as well. One thing to note, if you query too much data, the calls will time out. So we see that a lot of people try to download the entire API for each month. And if you do that, it will not work. So it's really meant to get quick, smaller amounts of data. So if you're running into that problem with any of your calls, just try to separate it into smaller chunks. So if you're looking at 1 month and every commodity, you might want to chunk out those commodities. Okay, so let's get into examples. And this, I think, will help with understanding and actually how the API works. So let's say you're a policymaker interested in the imports of cars into the U.S. So you want to construct a call that shows all the countries that we imported new and used passenger cars with a given end-use code 30,000 in 2020, and we want to include the annual value. So let's hop onto the web browser, and I'm using Edge here, but you can use any browser, and let's create the call. So this is that first part, that part that does not change from the HTTPS up to the INTL trade. So the next thing we have to do is figure out those final 2 directories. So we're looking at imports, so that one is pretty straightforward. Then we have to figure out what's the data set within that we want. And since we're looking for an end-use code, we're going to want the end-use endpoint. And you might say, how do I know? And that's just from experience, and I'll show you where that resource is where you can find all these endpoints. Okay, and then the next thing we want is that get statement. This question mark get equals. Okay, and now we can get to the meat of our call, which is the parameters. So again, the first thing we want is our comma-separated parameters. And we have to think about what do we want. So we know we want country. So we have, and we assign each country a 4-digit country code. So we want to have the code. But so we can read it, we also want to have the name, the country name. And at the end, I'm going to show you where you can find a list of every single parameter. But just so you can get the logic of this. Okay, then we want the end use code. So since we want data by end use, and the end use codes differ for imports and exports. So we want the I end use. That's the code. And for description, so we can read it, we want the I end use description. And we have a long and short description. And if you're just for readability, I prefer the long description. Okay, and then we also want that annual value. So we want the annual value. We're going to want not all val mo. We want all val YR, so year. Okay. So those are all the things we want. Now we have to narrow the focus. So first we want to specify the time. So we're going to use a year and month for that. So the year is going to be equal to 2020. And then if you remember, we want the annual value. We're going to want to set our month as being December, as that's the last month of the year. And then we also are looking for a specific end-use code. And so we're going to put that in here as well. 30,000. Okay. Oh, and see, if you see this, that means there was a mistake. So the mistake here is that for imports, there's actually a different value parameter, and it's always good to check. And so it's gen value. Okay, so now we're on the right track. We're looking at our output right now, and if you look, you can see the list of variables just in the order that we have them: country code, country name, IN use, long description, and then the value, year, month, and then again the end use code, and we can see the data underneath. So looking through, we see the total for all countries. We see the countries, and we have the right end use, and we see a value. So this is the annual value. So look, we have the countries, and at the bottom of this, we have these country groupings. Now, if you look at the second part of this example, we want to remove all these country groupings from our results. So how do we do that? Well, there's a few ways. You might say, okay, well, we want to narrow, so we should use the ampersand, which is correct. So we should use the ampersand for this. And one way to do it, which I would not suggest, is to go and country code equals 1220, then and country code equals 2010, but that seems like it's going to take a lot of time. But actually, the API has a way to do this, and the way it's called a summary level. So let's just see what that looks like on here. And it helps separate the country groupings and the individual countries. So let's just see. We can put it in these comma separated because we're interested right now in it very generally. And we see a new field appear. So we see for Canada, for example, you have this DET. But for European Union, we have CGP. So that's for country grouping. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is narrow that focus for that summary level. So we can add it. You can add it anywhere, but I'm just going to add it at the end. So we're going to set it equal to DET. And let's look now. Okay, so now we don't have that country grouping. And you might get rid of it just because it's not necessary for your analysis or you're trying to avoid double counting. You will notice there's still the total for all countries. So you can get rid of that as well, and we'll cover that in the next example. Okay, so now that we have this data that we want, how do you download it and open in Excel? That's the next part of this problem. Well, it's really going to depend on your browser and your machine. I'm using a Windows machine, and this is Edge. But for Edge and for Chrome, what you can do is just simply hit Control-S, and that will save this file. And you'll see the file name save as type. Right now, it's a JSON file, but what you're going to want to do is go to All Files and see if it's saved here. But you want to save it as a .csv. So you're going to save it. Okay, and now we can open it, see what it looks like. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. You see them all in their own columns. If you want to clean it up a little bit, you can hit Control-H, get rid of these brackets. Delete any columns you want. And at this point, you could save it as an Excel workbook. You don't want to save it right away as a Excel workbook, because if you look at this, these variables are separated by commas. So if you save it as an XLSX, what's going to happen is all the data is going to go in that first cell. So you want to save it as CSV, and then from there save it in Excel. Okay, so that's the first example. So let's move on to the next one. So you are a cattle advocacy group, and you are interested in state-to-country flows of cattle. So we're going to construct a call to show monthly export value for every combination of state and country for cattle, and I give you a NAICS code 1121 in March of 2021. Okay, so it's a little different. We're using different classification system. We're adding a state in here. We're also looking at monthly value. That should change the how it looks. Okay. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want that we can just take this call and start all over again. from that INTL trade. Okay, so we had to figure out those first two directories first again. This time we're looking at exports. So that one's pretty straightforward. And what about this one? So we need the state. So we want to have state and then NAICS because we're looking at NAICS code. So that's that URI, that address is done. Then we just need our get statement. Again, doesn't change. And then we want our parameters. So what do we want this time? We want the state. So we know we want a state. We want that country again, so we'll do the country code and country name. We also want NAICS. Now NAICS has the same codes for imports and exports, so just NAICS. Okay, and then NAICS LDESC, because we want to be able to read what the code actually means. This time we're looking for monthly value. So this time we do want that all val mo. Okay. Now those are the things that we want generally. So those are comma separated. So the state, the country, the NAICS code, the monthly value. Now what do we want specifically? This time let's use time. So I'll show you that. So time is sort of a mixture of both the month and year. And you write the year, then a dash, and then the month. So the month is a 2-digit month, so for March, it's going to be 03. So if it's before October, it'll be 03, so you want to make sure to add that 0 in front. And then we want to add that NAICS code as well, which was 1121. Okay. So let's take a look at our output. So we see the state, and we see this hyphen, which just means the total for all states. See in the city code also, so this is the total for all countries, all states at the top. We see some country groupings for total states. We see some country and state combinations with country groupings mixed in there. And then at the end, we see the totals for all countries for each state. And then with the monthly value in this column. Okay, so we did that. And what's next? We want to remove all the totals as well as the country grouping. So each line should have a unique country-state combination. Okay. That seems doable. We already know how to get rid of those country groupings with our good friend summary level. So we just set it equal to DET again. Okay, so that does get rid of those country groupings, but we still have all these totals. We have the country totals and we have the state totals. So when I get rid of those, how do we do that? Because these all say DET, so we can't use our summary level 1. Luckily, the API has another summary level 2, which allows us to fine-tune more our results or our output. So let's just put it here, and I can put it anywhere, but I'm just going to put it at the end over here. Summary level 2. Let's just see what it looks like for all these. So we can see at the top, that summary level is just an NA. And then we see for these totals for each country, for all states, it's just NACY. So that's not the data we want, so we don't want that summary level. We see at the bottom here, the state totals for all country are NAST, that's not what we want. Okay, but I see, for example, this one, we have Wisconsin, South Korea, and that seems like something that we would want. And we see the summary level, NASTCY. And then, now that we know what it is, we can add it, and I'm just going to add it here as the first ampersand one. The order of these don't matter, it will just change the order of your columns. So I could put it here, I could put it after the time, I could put it after NAICS. Okay. It's equal to NASTCY. CY. Oh. Looks like it didn't take. So let me try that one more time. That happens a lot if you misspell something, which I probably did. Here we go. So we can see now that those totals are gone. And our output is just each has its own state and each has its own country combination. So that is the second part of this. So let's look at the last part. Only show results for exports to Asian countries. So as a hint, all country codes will start with the number 5. So let's take a look at our output again. So we do see some countries start with 5, and we are narrowing it. So we're going to want to have another ampersand separated variable. So let's just put it in here. So one way to do this, the country code is equal to 5700 and is equal to 5520 for Vietnam. But that doesn't seem very useful again. So how do we do this? There's not another summary level, but there is a feature within the API which allows you to match the codes based off of a pattern called wildcard. So the wildcard for the API is an asterisk. So what this section tells the API is look for all the country codes that start with 5 with something after. Now let's see how that works. Okay, so we see now that all of our data is now countries that have a country code that start with 5. And you can see some of those in the data for that. Okay, so that is the end of our examples. So I hope you guys have a little bit more of understanding of the logic behind it. Now, I know that some of the parameters or some of the data sets you might not know how to find them. And that's why we have our International Trade API homepage. So I have it linked here. Open that up. Okay, so this is the home page, and you can see right up at the top, you have a list of all of these endpoints. So these are all those addresses that you can find your data on. You have what for exports as well as imports. And probably the best resource on this page is going to be this user manual. It's it's many pages. We spent a lot of time perfecting it and trying to make it as good as possible, and it has all sorts of information from signing up to keys to all those endpoints. Again, we also have things to do and to not do, common pitfalls. We have example API calls, 2 whole pages of them, and we also have these appendices. So these are lists of all the parameters. So you can see all the parameters, what they correspond to, and what endpoints they belong to. So for example, that air value, so method transportation, which we didn't talk about that much, but is available on the API, is available on all endpoints. But some things, for example, this domestic foreign for exports, it's only available on these endpoints. So there's some that it won't be available in. And we also have the same thing for imports. And there's even more parameters and variables for imports. Just scrolling through here just to see how many there are. And there's also a list of these summary levels. So we see our friend NASTCY from that last example. And there's also the import summary levels as well, along with the country grouping code. Okay. And then another great resource is our branch. And here's the information for our branch, phone number and email. And if you contact us there, you can ask us any questions about the API. We're happy to help with people find the data they want, fine-tune their calls, and get exactly what they want. And then here's my personal contact. So it's my email and my phone. If you have any questions after this that I don't get to, or if you start working on it and you want some help, you can always email me. At this point, I hope you guys have learned a lot about the API and started to feel like you want to take a crack at it. And thank you guys for your time. At this point, I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you. At this time, if anyone over the phone line would like to ask a question, please ensure that your phone is unmuted, press *1, and record your first name. If you do need to withdraw your question, press *2. Again, to ask a question, press *1. It will just take a moment for questions to come in.
All right. While we're waiting, were there any questions in the chat?
I believe there was a question in the chat, but I believe Jason was able to address the questions. I haven't seen any additional questions in the chat.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Jason and Wendy.
Actually, there is a question in the chat that just came up. Can you pull the data into SQL?
I'm not sure how you can pull the data into SQL, but the data is outputted in a JSON format. So if SQL can take data in like that, or if you could save as CSV and then use that data set in a SQL, then you should be able to use it.
And we do have a question on the phone line. Would you like to take that?
Sure.
Okay. Our question is from Scott. You may go ahead.
Good afternoon. This is probably a simple question, but how do you write the call such that you're pulling multiple months at once without having to do a really long string?
Sure. There are a couple ways to do that. So it depends on what you want to do. And let's just see if I can try it out. So one way to do it, if you're interested in all months in a year, is if you take this and let's just turn it to year. Let's say equal to, I'll just do 2020, I think, and then you move month into the comma separated, and you'll see that there is like right here, that's the month. It's not always going to be in order. I don't know if you'll see this here. It looks like this one is in order, but sometimes it's not in order. So that's another reason why you always want to pick month. Using the time, there is a from and to nomenclature, and I think we have that in the guide, an example of that. And so if you wanted just 6 months maybe, that would be good for that. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah. So like you see in here, from and then to, you can use that as well.
Yeah, thanks. That looks like what I had in mind.
Yeah. So again, the time, if you're querying a lot of data, it might slow you down. So it might just even be easier to use the year and month and then just delete later, but just something to be aware of.
And does that conclude your question, Scott?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
And just as a reminder, for those on the phone line, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star followed by 1. And our next question is from Jeremy. You may go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Actually, let me mute speak
feedback. Are you able to maybe mute your computer? Thank you.
I'm still
Jeremy,
I apologize. I got that.
Okay.
Okay. So my question is this. First of all, I want to thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. Gave me some insight on accessing information through the United States Census Bureau. Did not even know that existed. And my question is, I'm actually a correctional rehabilitation consultant, and we're voicing second chance initiatives to promote correct justice solutions. And my concern is that I know that the prison industry across America does engage in country-to-country commerce. And I kind of want some guidance on how to access that government information utilizing the same programming interface that you just showed me.
Jason, maybe you want to chime in, but I think anything that identifies like who is doing the exporter or importer is something that we don't really publish as a rule. So something like that, I don't think is data that we publish data on. Maybe it's somewhere else, but it's not something that we have that I'm aware of, unless I'm wrong, Jason.
So the information is strictly limited to general commercial?
It's anyone who files. So we if you import something over a certain dollar amount or with certain licensing requirements, you have to file it, and that's where we get our data from. When we publish the data, we don't. We're actually prohibited by law from disclosing anything about who's doing the importing or exporting. So you can find about like the commodities or the countries that they're going to,
or the
states that they're from.
So you're speaking in generalities, not who's doing it, but the volume of what, et cetera.
We're required by federal law to protect the confidentiality of our respondents. And so because there's a requirement to report this information, we are bound not to release any information that would identify business practices.
So that being said, like using the same instructional information that you gave me, if, I don't know, prison mattresses, they're going overseas in the volume, et cetera, that would be something that I could access?
So long as there's a code that identifies it, that level of detail, probably, that very specific level of detail is probably not available. But there would be information on exports of mattresses.
So where would I go to find the code?
The codes are available on our webpage at www.census.gov/trade. There is a tab there for the Schedule B, which will give you export codes. USITC, they define the import codes, and those codes are available on their webpage.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'll certainly explore that and see what we can come up with.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, there are no further questions on the phone line. Just a reminder, to ask a question, please press star followed by 1.
Jeremy, there is a question in the chat. Frank McQuarrie is asking, does the data cover shipping, trucking, and air?
So our method of transportation does cover air, and it covers vessel, and containerized vessel, which is a part of vessel. As far as other method transportations, they are reflected in the total, but we do not break them out specifically. And we have data for the value and shipping weight for those method transportations, air and vessel and containerized vessel.
We do also have several people asking for the link to the user guide.
Okay, I'll go back, and when they send out the slides, they'll be on here as well. But I'll leave it here.
And on the phone line, there are no further questions.
All right, and there's nothing more in the chat?
I'm not seeing one. There is a question, how are item roll-up definitions qualified for advanced TAC? That's a specific designation. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. So we have on our website, we do have concordance files. So those commodity to the advanced technology categorizations, that's where you would find those. So you know what the underlying commodities are. I'm not sure off the top of my head how they're calculated. Jason, do you know?
Well, essentially, advanced technology products are designated harmonized system codes that qualify as advanced technology, and we roll those up into larger technology categories, and those are reported separately.
And on the phone line, there are still no further questions.
And we're being asked about the high-tech definitions. Those are available at our international trade webpage. We have a link to the concordances that list out all of the high-tech classifications and the different harmonized system codes that go into making those classes.
And as a reminder on the phone line, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star followed by 1. One moment to see if there are any further questions. There are no further questions at this time on the phone.
Jason, are there any additional questions in the chat?
I just scrolled up. I'm not seeing one person is asking how to convert their own data to API. I'm afraid that's beyond our expertise. We're not going to be able to answer that question, I'm afraid. There's now a question, which web page has the import classifications, the harmonized system import classifications? Those are available at USITC, International Trade Commission.
Yeah, the website is HTS, as in Harmonized Tariff Schedule.usitc.gov. That has their search engine for that.
Are we able to post that website in the chat? Okay, are we ready to wrap up if there are no further questions, operator?
Yeah, there are no further questions on the phone.
Okay, Jeremy, any other final comments before we close out?
No, just thank you everyone again for coming, and hopefully you learned a little bit about it.
Yes, great. Thank you once again. Thank you for your participation in today's webinar. Special thanks to Jeremy Sanchez of the Census Bureau for all the valuable information shared for accessing data via the API, Applied Programming Interface. I certainly learned a lot, and thank you for that resources that you have available. They will certainly be helpful. And we hope you have some key takeaways from today's presentation. As I mentioned in my opening, this is World Trade Month, and we have 2 additional webinars that will be offered on Thursday, May 20th and Thursday, May 27th, involving e-commerce and globalization. to include developing a digital strategy for global marketplace, and the second webinar on the logistics of growing global e-commerce and federal support programs for all your export needs for expanding global growth. So once again, we ask that you please join us for the remaining 2 Thursdays in the month. The webinars will start at 2 p.m. and they will end at 3. You can access the login information just as you did for this webinar at the census.gov Data Academy site. And you can also find the webinar material about 10 business days following today's event. So once again, thank you for joining us. All positive feedback in the chat, and enjoy the rest of your day and be safe. This concludes the webinar for today.
Thank you. That does conclude today's call. All participants may disconnect at this time.